we got as far as Anaheim, but we're going to back up a little bit and kind of talk about a few of the things of our life earlier, like the time when you were in Cologne and you were getting ready to leave Cologne to go to England. Tell us a little bit about that.
When did you first think of leaving? When did you first think of leaving?
Well, I didn't really think, especially on a hurried leaving. I mean, I know everybody was trying to get out, and I had a friend by the name of Stoffel, who was a cantor in Cologne, and he came to me and he said, get ready, we are going to leave Germany. And I said, all right, we'll let you know. No, he said, we are leaving Germany tonight. And I said, what you want to do? I'm not prepared or anything. I'll meet you at 8 o'clock, he said, and at the railway station, and we are leaving. So I got everything ready, papers, whatever was necessary, and I met him. And I asked him what was so urgent about it. And as far as I know, he said, in the house where I live, I used to be friendly with one man who lived there and who became an SS officer and a party. And when he came down the staircase this morning, he said, somehow whispering, we'll pick you up tonight. That's all. Picking you up tonight at this concentration camp. And that's why he decided so suddenly. You see, urged me to come. And we went out, and in retrospect I realized that was a very sound advice. I may not have been able to get out afterwards. And that's how I came to London. That was the only place where one could get out. And for me it was the excuse that I will be coming back teaching England. I taught geography, and teachers who had a certain project to teach were permitted to go to that land and to get a closer acquaintance. And that's how I left and chose London.
What date was that? What date was that?
That was on the, I think I mentioned it was the 22nd of July 1938.
Right. That's right. Same date.
Right.
Well, twice the same. It must be true.
It must be true.
Yes. And I left Germany, and of course once you cross the border from Germany to Belgium, you see that we have to go to Belgium and then eventually to Holland, oh, you breathe up, you see freedom, and that was a wonderful feeling. And that's how I got to London eventually. The control in London was very strict, nothing like today. Everybody can walk in and walk out of England. But at that time, strict control, and many people had to undress and to prove that they didn't carry anything prohibited with them. So I arrived in London. Of course, we are asked questions. How long are you staying? What is it? And I had my certificate that I am going to London for, we have to be returned in a month, and that was very good, otherwise it would have been difficult. Because I remember just before that, my brother also crossed the same journey. He crossed into London, and he, being a clergyman, is very pious. He wouldn't tell a lie. What are you doing in London? Well, I'm looking for a job, he said, because you know I can't exist in Germany under present condition. Oh, did they say, is that the case? Yes. The next train is leaving in an hour, and you go back where you came from. See, that was my brother. And he hid for 6 months somewhere, I think in Holland or in between countries, and then tried again, you see, having learned his lesson, you see, and said, I'm only coming to England on a visit. See? And he had a chance of staying in England, and that's saving his life.
Now, Peter mentioned in London, you worked in the Aliyah office for children to bring.
No, I didn't work in the Aliyah office. I worked in the choir. I went to the Aliyah office like everybody who went to London. First went to Bloomsbury House, that's what it's called, Bloomsbury House, and reported as a refugee, and there was a certain amount which was given to him to hold one over for the first period. And that was my first trip in London. And I took an apartment in Stamford Hill, well-known district in London, and stayed there. It was a nice Jewish family. And
did you work with refugees?
I had a chance to contact the choir, the Harbonim choir, which said yes, they are looking for a choir director. So I just happened to come in at the right moment, and I became the choir director. And shortly afterwards, at a concert, after a concert.
Daddy, the question was about the Aliyah, from the people coming from Germany, the children, the refugee children.
Oh yes, that is another subject, but I'll mention it now since I've mentioned the other one before. In Germany, Klibanski, Dr. Klibanski, the director of the school, arranged with other people who were leaders of the Jewish communities to get a permission from the Hitler to allow 10,000 children to leave Germany. I don't quite remember what the exchange was, why, were they paid or whatever it is, but anyhow it was signed that 10,000 Jewish children out of Germany and Austria were permitted to leave the country and to emigrate in London. We had to get the permission of England to let these children in, which England did, which behaved most gallantly. It can't be repeated often enough what England did at that time. So now the question was, which children do you choose, and so on. So we told all the cities, Berlin, Vienna, Hamburg, Frankfurt, and so on, to invited application. And this all had to be done within 1 month. So this application came in from certain people, and we had quite a respectable number of applicants who came. I think most of them came really from Vienna, wanted to go out. But I remember that we had a number of vacant places, and we could have put in another 1,000 in order to fill the quota of 10,000. and we approached another number of people who had permitted that their children will come to London, and suddenly they got what we call cold feet, and they said no, we are not parting with our children. As if our children are safe in England, they are certainly safe with their parents. And 10,000 more and 1,000 more children could have come in to London, but were prevented from their parents to leave Germany because they were afraid. And it's, I can understand. You see their children go away into a foreign country, what is going, who's looking after them, and so on and so on. They were worried. You see, unfortunately, the worry cost their lives. That was an amazing thing, these 10,000 which were permitted. And we had reunions since then, 2 or 3 reunions of those group which is called Kindertransporte. And the Kindertransporte have met in various cities. The head of the Kindertransporte is a lady in London who makes all the arrangements. Wonderful, very religious lady, and arranges everything. And it is, again, I have all the details here of these Kindertransport arrangements. That is something, a wonderful gesture of the people concerned who made the arrangements, and of Britain, to let these 10,000 children in. And I have the documentation here of all these on which I participated.
And, okay, after you got married and your children were growing up, you did do traveling.
Yeah,
Okay, and you did say you went to Switzerland
sure.
and you went to Germany.
Yes, yes.
You also went to Israel
Yeah,
with the family or with, the temple choir.
yeah.
Tell us about.
There was again a man in Israel by the name of Propes, who had a wonderful idea to invite choirs from all over the world, originally Jewish choirs, but later on we found out that this was impossible, because these people had to pay for their fare to Israel. Once they arrived in Israel, they were taken care of, put up in certain hotels, schools, and so on. And a music festival was arranged afterwards where the choirs were performing.
What year?
That was 1951, and the biggest concert was in 1952, where Propes rented a whole ship, you see, called the Negba. And this ship held 500 singers. These 500 people were put onto the boat and were fed. Of course, the conditions were not the best, and not everybody had a bunk to sleep in, and so on. And eventually we found out that the nicest way of sleeping in the middle of the summer is on deck. See? And eventually it was difficult to find a place on deck, because the deck was already full, see? And the captain said, no, you go down to your cabin, wherever it is. And this cabin were not air conditioned. The 500 children came to
Singers.
children, not children,
Singers.
adults. These were adults, excellent singers. The best choir from London, the best choirs of Montreal, of many cities, first-class musicians. Los Angeles sent the best choir, and so on. And that eventually was a great music festival, and the name was given Zimria to this event. It was so successful that Probus decided to repeat it. And he said he'll repeat it every 3 years. Of course, all this costs money. And the second time and so on, we were told to contribute in whatever way we could, and so on, which everybody did gladly. And it came to the second Zimria, to the third Zimria. After the third Zimria, it was 1963. When was the war?
67.
67. Was 1967. And Probus said, now we are going to have it every second year as the Zimria. And the second, and what was in 1967? The 6-Day War. And nobody wanted, everybody backed out. What? The 6-Day War, we are not thing. And Probus forced people, he wrote and he telephoned. And he telephoned me several times. Make sure that you are coming. Don't mind the war. A Zimria can only support the morale of a country, and it'll be good. I had great trouble in getting the youngsters, our choir, we had a youth choir, to come because the parents were dissuaded from by certain people I don't want to mention, and our choir was only a very small choir, the one who get. But I must say it was for me the nicest Zimria of all the 15 Zimriot which I attended over the years. That was Probus. He died after the 12th Zimria, you see, and made himself a name in Israel as an outstanding supporter of art and music. That is Zimria. So for me it was my credit that I was the founder of the Zimria, because to the committee originating the Zimria belonged Probus and Shlomo Kaplan and I, you see, which was a great honor for me.
Okay, it's the next day, it's April 12th. We're going to resume our conversation with Philip Moddel. But let's go back a few years to Cologne and talk about the play, the musical play that you wrote just before you left Cologne.
I was in charge of music in Cologne. I was in charge of sports and subjects which I taught. And this was a time when people thought of emigrating because of the political situation. And it came to my mind, it would be nice to have something on a stage which shows the character of that time. People being ready to change, inquiring where to go, what to do with their families, what to do with their children. And so this all brought together a play which was called Der bunte Weg, the colorful way, or this different way, the Moddel way. In German it sounds very attractive, the word Der bunte Weg. And it talks about two boys, one Jewish informed, the other one not Jewishly informed, and the one not informed was always asking the questions while the other one answered it. And for instance, they said, well, what do you know, what, and so on. He said, why don't we go to the Jewish center here and see what they are doing? And so the two boys went to the music center, and there was just a performance, a preparation for Purim. It was before Purim. And then the Purim story was told in music and in characters. The children performing it were beautifully dressed. Our artistic lady who was in charge of this was outstanding in creating stage pictures and dressing the children. And eventually, these children, if I talk about children, this is approximately from age 12 up to 18. And this was performed, and I wrote the music, and I orchestrated it and conducted the orchestra. I studied the music with the youngsters, and they knew their part very well. And I made sure that only those were singing in the choir who were tone perfect. I can't stand a choir where there's somebody sticking out like a sore thumb, singing a wrong melody. Yes, no, we'll leave this for afterwards. So this was performed then, and was of course to a full hall. At that time, Jews were not allowed, 1937, 38, were not allowed to go to public theaters. They were not allowed to go to concerts. So everything that was performed had to be performed by Jewish artists. It was we had a Jewish symphony orchestra which traveled from town to town through the whole of Germany. We had Jewish singers, outstanding singers who performed the music, and it was really a highlight in cultural musical life, not only at that time but forever. There was hardly a better Jewish group and performances undertaken anywhere than at that time, because we were all pushed together in one group, and that's it, and we had to do it, and we did it well. And I don't want to mention concerts. For instance, we performed Schubert's Seventh Symphony. We performed his great symphony called, you see, and it was wonderful. And we performed string quartets excellently and perfectly, because Jewish musicians are among the best in the world. And especially if they have to play for Jewish people, knowing that every note is being swallowed up. So this was the Volksbund, the Jewish Volksbund, which functioned. And I wrote this play for the same group. And my play was received very favorably. And I had praises and applause from many parts of the country of Germany who wanted to perform it. As I mentioned before, it did not end up as a public success because people had no time to think of theater and of concerts. Everybody thought, how do I get out of here and where do I go? And this was also one of the themes of the Bunte Weg. The boys came to one of these groups who discussed possibilities for Jewish to settle South America, Cuba, and so on, to emigrate. And this was also of interest, and this was produced all in words and in music. And songs were I had written for this, which were sung and attractive. anyhow, this in essence tells you what my musical attention was. Apart from this, I also had a chance to conduct a symphony orchestra. It was a conductor of the German radio orchestra, Hans Schmidt-Isserstedt, you see, who gave me a chance, and I went through mostly Brahms. You see, Brahms is my favorite composer. He's closest to my heart. And so we had Brahms' First Symphony, Brahms' Fourth Symphony, first and fourth, which were performed, which I conducted more or less successfully. More. Then I left Cologne, as I had mentioned before, rather suddenly, advised by a friend who said, "You'll have to get out." And when I said, "Yes, I'll get ready. I'll meet you tonight at 8 o'clock, and we are taking the train tonight at 8 o'clock to Belgium, and from there trying to get to London." So suddenly were decisions. Now, it was a good part that helped me that my passport was always ready for traveling. That was not only at that time, it is today as well. My passport is always endorsed, ready, and all I had to do is get the few pennies together to get out, and out I went.
Now, that was your first musical play.
That was the first one.
You wrote others.
Then when I came to Dublin, you see, I wrote in Dublin 2 plays. One was called Hello Yesterday, and these were more reviews type, something like Hart and
Roger and Hart.
Roger and Hart, you see, and so on, this type of music. And there was one which was really as good, I should say, as anything that is on the stage today, called Donnybrook Fair. And the book was written by Tony Gray, a friend of mine, who was an editor of the Irish Times. And it talked about the times when there was a fair in Dublin, which was called Donnybrook Fair because it was in Donnybrook, and it was a rather hectic affair. People were rather rowdy and ruffians, and anything that helps to improve a show. And we incorporated also some traditional songs and words of Irish songs which were sung at the Donnybrook Fair, which originally had taken place 300 years prior to my efforts. And this Donnybrook Fair, I should say, has probably the best melodies I ever wrote in it. And I know I had it here perform a song or two at our temple, and it was very successful, and many came to me and said, "What, and this is not on the stage, this you perform here, this should have been on Broadway." See? And I didn't disagree. See? But today to put anything on Broadway, as good as it is, you see, goes into the millions and millions, you see. And my salary was slightly below the necessary amount, which could have put a show on Broadway. So it's still here and still waiting. And anybody who wants a good play and want to back it, and want to make sure he has something that will succeed, should ask for my address.
Was that the only play that you performed in Dublin?
That was, yes, that was the only, yeah, yeah.
And the second one, the second play, the
The
Hello
sec-
Yesterday?
Yes, was also.
Who wrote it? What was it?
That was also written by the same group. We worked
Tony
together.
Gray?
Yes, we worked together on it.
What about Put the Children Early to Bed?
Well, these are individual songs, pop songs, you see, which didn't make the hit market because I'm a bad public relation man. I'm not a pusher, unfortunately. I wish I had some talent in this direction. I have talent in producing music and to writing lyrics, but not to go out and to sell it and tell people how good it is. See, I always think they should find out and should come to me. Of course, that's the wrong attitude in a modern world. So that's for my, yes. And what I also did is choir conducting quite frequently. I conducted the Dublin Jewish Choral Society, and I also had a Dublin non-Jewish group, and we sang quite a number of choral works, especially the Christmas carols, which I had to conduct, and I did it very well because I like Christmas carols. They're nice. And we sang them in to private groups, we sang them in churches, and I was probably the only Jewish choir conductor who played the organ in Methodist and in Catholic churches accompanying my choir. Yes.
Now all this was in Dublin,
That was in Dublin, yes.
and you were doing this up until 1958.
Yes, yes, yes.
And during this time, your children were growing up, and you were conducting the choirs, you were acting as cantor,
Yeah,
and the Jewish community was getting smaller.
exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
now,
Getting smaller and getting so small that I got cold feet. And with my cold feet, I started wandering and leaving Ireland.
Now-
Ireland is not for young people. Ireland is for old people who like to spend the evening in the pub having a ball of malt. See? But
now,
this time I said it right. But young people emigrate. And this is not only Jewish young people, non-Jewish young people, all the same, comes to a certain age out. And therefore, we have no youth in Dublin or in Cork, which was a lively city once upon a time. Today it's a sleepy old city. Limerick has died altogether. There is hardly anything. That was also one of the big cities in Ireland. And that went for Galway and for many of the other places in Ireland.
now, did Paula agree that let's pick up and leave as well? Paula and the children?
Yeah.
Susan was 14,
Yeah.
Peter was, Susan was 15.
14.
14, and Peter was a
Yeah.
year younger.
Yeah.
Of course, Garrett was a baby. How did they all feel about your decision
To emigrate. I must say I never found out because I never asked them. See, all I said is, well, we'll get our things ready, and we are leaving on March the 17th, which was St. Patrick's Day, and I arrived on St. Patrick's Day in New York. And interestingly, arriving in St. Patrick's Day, New York, we had a Jewish mayor in Dublin, Bobby Briscoe, and Bobby Briscoe was supposed to speak as a church in New Rochelle that evening. And in my hotel I received a SOS notice. Bobby Briscoe is not well, he can't come, and he suggested that you go and take his place and give the St. Patrick's address in the synagogue in New Rochelle, which I did quite successfully, yes.
Okay, and then when you came to New York and you inquired, you came out to Los Angeles, and with...
Yeah, I could have settled down in New York immediately. And in retrospect, perhaps I made a mistake. I should have gone to New York, because New York is the center of everything. But I wanted to see, California, especially having an aunt here in California, who was very good and very kind to us, and also gave us the affidavit we needed an affidavit permitting us to enter the country. This affidavit stated that in case I shouldn't be able to support my family, she will take over, or they will take over, whatever it is, which she did, you see. Of course, knowing that this will never be the case, see. Because all my life I have to thank the good Lord. I was never depending on anybody. I always made my own way. I always had enough for my next meal, and I always had a roof over my head.
Okay, now you're in Anaheim. You're the cantor at Temple Beth Emet.
Yes.
A very small temple with a lot of potential in a very growing area.
That's right.
Tell us about your experiences, your family, your life here in Anaheim.
Well, arriving in Anaheim, I don't even know what happened at the beginning. All I know is that we had immediately, we rented a house and lived there for about a month, for about a year. And then we moved into the house, which you see right now, this one here. And this was just being built. It was a brand new track. And we moved in here, and apparently we must have liked it, because this is now the 36th year that we are in this house here, and approximately the same time living in Dublin. When I came first to the synagogue in Beth Emet in Anaheim, I said, oh no, never, that's not for me. It was a schoolhouse and an enlarged garage where we got together and formed a synagogue. And so I spoke to my family and said, well, I had to sign a contract for a year. We'll stay a year and that's it. And meanwhile I look for something else in Los Angeles, which is a more respectable community, and we'll find something. But after a year I got so used to the people here and to my friends and to the members of the congregation that I didn't have the heart to leave. And I know, for instance, came the rabbi from Dallas came here in Texas, and he came here, was over here one Shabbat, and he said to me, what are you doing? And I told him I'm doing cantorial work, I'm training 2 choirs, I'm teaching 22 hours a week, and that's it. All this you are doing, and so on. We are looking for a cantor in Texas. You'll be the right man. And we offer you the position right now. How much do you get? You see? And when I told him the figure I get, he said, well, we'll at least double it. or probably more, you see. And that was it. So that made me decide not to go to Texas, because I said, how can I leave my friends here? That's a new congregation. I'm now 1 year with this congregation, and they need me, and I can't possibly leave. So I said no, and what should I say? Was it right? Was it wrong? You see, c'est la vie, and life that commands what you, sometimes gives you direction what to do and what not to do. And I did it, and I'm still here. And at that time I had, the congregation grew. After a year we were 180 members, and eventually we grew up to 800 families here in Anaheim, which is quite a respectable congregation. And that was for me a satisfaction, you see, that there's some of my work is here verewigt, we say in Germany, is here forever, you see, as part of the thing. So I stayed here, and I kept on staying, and I'm very loyal. And I think loyalty is the finest, and I'm not patting myself on the back, loyalty is the finest character trait anybody can have. Somebody is loyal, you can rely on him, and that's it. And I was reliable, and I did practically everything in the synagogue that was to be done. And that made me stay on here. And when I retired officially in 1985, the next morning I had a letter from the president and our secretary asking me, that was in 1985, about short 10 years ago, asking me to just sign this letter and so on. So I said, what is it? It's all right, never mind, sign it. You see? So I looked through it and I said, herewith Cantor Moddel commits himself to a new contract which will end at life's end for a soul, where I sold my soul for the time of my life. And I was laughing. I said, what do you want of me? Don't get yourself somebody new and so on. But just for the fun of it, I signed. And here I'm still, after, as I say, 36 years, I'm still in the same position and still busy and active. Of course, there was no special clause for advancing salary, and I never asked for an increase. I never knew how much I was getting in all these years. All I knew that I had enough for my next meal and for my family. And that was it.
Okay, can you kind of look back over the 27 years as you were cantor here?
Yeah.
Some of your major accomplishments as the cantor, as a choir director. Can you kind of tell us a few of what you feel were some of your major accomplishments here?
What was my major accomplishment?
Some of them, not one. There's many.
I almost have to ask my children
Okay.
to help me, because I never recorded it, you see. I just did whatever had to be done. And I did this not for 27, but for 36 years. You see?
The development of the choir, for
Yeah.
example, both an adult
Choir,
and
we
children's
developed
choir.
the choir, of course, and the choir was a good choir, our temple choir, at least during the time when I was in charge of it. And
Going to the Zimriya in Israel with the choir.
oh yes, yes.
You mentioned that yesterday, but you know.
Of course, yes. I was one of the founder members of Zimriya and the music festival in Israel, and which we visited very frequently. And I had a choir which I always brought along to the Zimriya, and our choir was always very well received. They always said, "Oh, the Irish choir, you see." And I know we had to sing on occasion the oh Donny boy, taram parararidara, see, and so on. And they just loved it. And that was, these were little things, you see, which made life worthwhile. And I never recorded really what did I do, what were my credits, and so on. I didn't have to put down any credits because I had a life contract.
You did further your education when you were out here, did you not?
For my reputation?
Your education.
My education, yes.
You went to the universities?
I went to the university.
Tell
sure.
us.
Well, I went to the university, I made my PhD, you see.
In what?
In music. I wrote my dissertation on the life of a musician, Achron, yes, Achron, a Jewish composer, which was also a very interesting. Could you get me the copy of Achron? Thin book.
It's in my room.
Where did you go to get your PhD? What university did you go to?
I went to the University of Judaism here, you see. First in Frankfurt, of course.
Right.
And then, yes, and then to the University of Judaism. And being in the University of Judaism, I had a music guide, Dr. Alfred Sendry, who was the guide of the music department. And when I wrote my dissertation, he said, I asked him, what subject do you want? He said, well, wouldn't you write a dissertation on the life and the work of a musician who lived here once, a Jewish composer, Achron? And I said, yes, can I get the material? Yes, you can get the material, because all that was written about Achron was kept by one family, Simovich, where he stayed. And I remember, he said, having visited the family Simovich and saw quite many volumes of music which he has written and so on. So that's all right. So I said, all right, I'll try this. And I have here the introduction to my dissertation, which said, in 1963, Dr. Alfred Sendry and Max Helfman was the other music director, suggested that a thesis on Achron would present the most suitable theme for dissertation. My first task was to discover the whereabouts of Achron's paper, so I set out to find the neglected works of the composer.
It's more interesting if you tell the story.
If I tell the story.
Yes.
Well,
It's much more than we wrote.
Dr. Sendry
Close.
gave me the address, and I went up to that address, Mrs. Simovich, and I knocked at the door, which was given to me in East Los Angeles, well, whatever it is, and out came some Mexican people, and they said, Simovich, no, you're not here. So I tried next door, no Simovic, no Simovic. So where could I find out? So I came back to the first house after searching, and I mentioned, I had a score with me. I said, music, music. Oh, her eyes lit up, you see, and this Mexican woman, and she said, music, come here. And she showed me out in the back of the house where the rubbish was being collected. She showed me a big trunk with music and said, Simovic. And I opened it up and I saw the compositions of Achron, all his works, all finely arranged in there. That's what I wanted. Of course, they had lived there, and they have moved away, the Simovic. And when they moved away, they didn't leave an address. See? So what happened? I said, can I take this with me? And I said, yeah, take it, you see. I had my car there, and I dumped into the car whatever I could. And I remember there were some family pictures of Achron and the parents and all this sort of thing. And I said, I'll come tomorrow and pick it up, and so on. By the way, I came back the next day, everything was taken away by the trash collectors. And it was a lucky moment that on this very day, I should have come to this street looking for a work which would normally have been away and forgotten, and that's all. So I took these works home. I built a little cabin with shelves in my garage and went through every work and described it and wrote an analysis of the works and so on. And then I thought the best thing is to donate it to the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And I wrote to them and asked them. They were delighted. They said, that's something wonderful. We'll get it, and we'll send even one of our representatives in Los Angeles up so that he can help you take down details about the found. And that was done. And then this man also happened to come back a number of times, parceling everything in smaller parcels, because big parcels the mail wouldn't have passed. And the long story ends that all the works of Achron were brought to Israel due to my writing a dissertation about his work and about his personality, about his friends and everything. And today this is a standard work in music, is my Achron dissertation. This gave me a doctorate in the combined by the Hebrew University and the local University of Judaism. See, but it was mostly the Hebrew University because they had really, they got all the works and everything. And whenever anybody goes to Jerusalem, just ask for the Achron collection and they'll find it. That was one. But being very greedy, I said one doctorate is not enough. See? I went up to Professor Sendry, a great musician, and I asked him, I have some time on hand, would you give me enough? Yes, he said, why don't you write on Max Helfmann? Max Helfmann was a well-known composer and choir conductor in Los Angeles. And I got in touch with Max Helfmann. In fact, I spent 2 years with him and got a good picture of him and of his work and so on, and put this all in another book. You see, the book which is called Max Helfmann, and there should at least be a photo. Yes, that is Max Helfmann. this work was written about 2 years later, in '64, and I received a citation from the University of Judaism, and at one of their year-end convocation, and that was my second word, you see, and I received a doctorate in fine arts, you see.
Also from the University of
Fine
Jerusalem.
arts. In combination, you see, that was all in combination with another, and I'll have my my artistic work. Well, that is something else. You see, I did painting as well. You see.
Tell us about it.
Huh?
Did you just do painting because you were talented in painting, or you took
Because
lessons?
I was talented in painting. I never did anything where I wasn't talented in. You see. I painted.
Self-learned?
I taught painting, and I have my degrees and certificates, you see, which go back to Germany still, and can be taken out, or will be taken out someday. And of course this talent has been transmitted to my children. My children are all very good in painting, in drawing, and I won't say more, otherwise you'll ask them, show me, you see. Yes. Artistic talent runs in our family, yes.
Now, Paula became very versed in languages.
Yeah.
And
Outstanding in languages.
how did she become so versed in languages, with the capability and knowledge?
Well, it began really out of necessity when she had to leave Germany for obvious reasons. She went to live in Paris, and there she learned. She was at that time about 13 years old, young, and she learned French and spoke French very well. And then when we got married, she had a certain kick on Spanish, and she went to one professor with whom she studied Spanish and became very proficient in this. And then she came, then she also made a doctorate at the university here in UCI, yes, in UCI.
Here.
Here. UCI, a doctorate, and started teaching, and she had to add, in fact, another language, which was Italian, which she chose, you see. And she also learned it, not as fluent as the others, but enough to be able to teach. What must a teacher know? A teacher must know his next lesson, you see. That's it. And that was how she struggled along there. But otherwise, in French, of course, she was perfect. It was probably her best language. And German, you see, she spoke German as well as I did. Yes. So,
Okay, and from that she was able to obtain a position at the School of International Languages.
Yeah, international now. First, she had a position at Irvine, at the UCI. She taught at UCI for, I think, about 6 years in UCI. And then from UCI, she was asked to take a position at the Institute for Advanced Study or something like this in Monterey, you see, which was again a challenge and worthwhile trying, you see, that yes, she was alive. She was, I would say she was the cleverest of the family, somehow. Very talented and very academic in her knowledge. Yeah. So now I have told you enough to.
Well, we got up to the point now the children are grown.
Yeah,
They're getting to go to school. They're leaving the home.
yeah.
What are you doing with yourself at this point? You're still.
I never asked myself what to do because I had so much to do that I never came to the predicament of asking myself, now what do I do next, you see? It's, I was at the temple, you see, and as I said, I had at the temple a full-time job. Not one full-time job, but a triple job, you see, doing the cantorate and doing the music and teaching children 22 hours. Which cantor would do that today in the whole world? Nobody. There is no cantor who would do that. If a cantor sings his piece on Shabbat and on festivals, and if he prepares bar mitzvah students, that's it. And if you ask him afterwards to do something else and so on, I'm too busy, I can't do that, you see. I never knew too busy, you see. One is always not busy enough. And if you want to find time for something, you do find time, anytime.
Now, you've had a very full life. Can you kind of create a statement, a message that you can bring to us, a profound message of how you can summarize things that you've accomplished, you've done, you want to bring forth and let your family know that something important has come from all of this?
I am, in order to answer this, I should go back to one of the rabbinic expressions, you see, which on many ways describes the necessity of a person to work and to make life worthwhile, and make life worthwhile by doing it. Not only by helping others, not only by doing something for God, but for yourself. You see, there is one, for instance, which says, Marbe Chayim, what is it? Yes. No, it's not. It's out of my head. I'll have it in a minute. See, the more you work, the more life you have. See? And the more life you have, the more are you of value to yourself and to other people. Yes. Well, unless you stop for a minute.
Okay. Okay, Ken, go ahead. Go ahead, Ken.
Yes. You are asking for words of wisdom at the end, just saying what my life's policy was, which directed me. There's one of them which our sages say, Marbe Torah, Marbe Chayim. The more you study, the more life you enjoy. And this is one of my guides. Another one is also one to be found in the Pirkei Avot, which says, and I think this is perhaps the most important of them all, Lau alecha hamlacha legmor, ve'lau ata ben chorim lehibotel mimeno. it is not up to you to finish a job. If that were the case, you'd say, I can't finish it, I'm not going to start. No, you start the job, and if you can't finish it, somebody else will finish it. But it's up to us to begin a job, whatever is involved in it for the future.
Thank you very much, Cantor Moddel. In the last 15 years, 20 years, you've done a lot of traveling. Tell us some of your experiences, the places you went, the places that you'd like your family to remember your experiences in your travels.
Well, my first major journey was in 1936 when I went to Lithuania to visit my brother Joseph, who is studying to be a rabbi there. And this was for me quite an experience already. I took a boat from Kiel in Germany and I went through the whole of the Baltic, arriving in Kovno, Lithuania, and then I made myself to the yeshiva and saw the life of a yeshiva, the boys who studied, the devotion to it, and the devotion of the rabbis to what they had to teach. And this was under very primitive circumstances. There was no luxury there. The rooms where they slept were very simple. The food they ate was simple. And I know when they wanted to drink a drop of water, we had to go to the well and let the bucket down and came up with some water which was distributed, which was not always clear. This was a journey important in many ways. I then traveled back again to Germany, and in Germany I visited German places, Berlin, Breslau, Frankfurt, and many others, and got to know them quite well. Later on, when I was more prosperous, I started making in my mind a list of places in the world which I had to see. And there were quite a number of them. In essence, all I saw at the end was what you see here. It was the whole world which I came around to see. And this was also very valuable in my education, because today geography is the most neglected subject in any schools. Most schools, most universities do not have geography at all. And if you ask children in Los Angeles about the neighbor in the north or the neighbor in the south, you see, which is Canada or Mexico, they don't know it. And if you ask them where is Mexico, oh, I don't know. See? So that is a great lack in education. And this lack certainly was nothing I could endure for a long time. So I went and I traveled country after country, state after state, and continent after continent, and I have visited Europe very thoroughly, especially my favorite cities, Paris, and my favorite country, Switzerland, and I went to Italy, to Spain, to Portugal, the whole of Czechoslovakia, and Poland, and what have you. Then I went to South America and became very fascinated with South America. I was 4 times in Rio de Janeiro and 3 times in Buenos Aires and Brazil and the country around it, and had seen eventually all countries in South America except
Bolivia.
Bolivia. In Bolivia I couldn't see because the airport was ice. This is the highest airport in the world, is in Sao Paulo, it's in Bolivia. Then where do we come to? We come to Australia, which I have seen, of course, and New Zealand also. I went from there to some of the islands, Tahiti and to Bora Bora, and then north again to Japan, to China. I've been a number of times in Hong Kong and Bangkok and just name them, including Guam. Yes, so of course Hawaii, everybody has been in Hawaii, and so I saw the major part of the world. Unfortunately, last year there was one little country left, and my class decided to go there. I'm teaching a class, adult education class now for 30 years, and that was Antarctica. And my class went to Antarctica, but for some reason or other, partly also because of the cold weather, I didn't go to Antarctica, but they went down and saw this as well. I also have been in, where are these big Galapagos, yes, Galapagos, and I don't know, it's difficult for me to name those which I have, it's easier to name those which I have not seen, you see. So I love traveling, and when I travel, I am the first one up in the morning. 6 o'clock I'm up, and by 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock I've done the whole city. I've been everywhere around there. And this is not always good for a partner, you see. If you take a partner and you ask the partner to get up and to be up at that hour, you see, they're not always very happy. You say, well, that's vacation, you see. But for me, vacation was just go around, see as much as possible. So I got to know this globe, which is called the Earth, quite well. And someday, when I find time enough, and what else is necessary, I'll try to go up a little higher, say hello to the moon or to Mars or any of the other continents that are waiting for me.
It's been a very full and exciting life, Philip.
Yeah, yeah.
Peter, Susan, is there any other questions you'd like to ask?
No.
Thank you, Philip Moddel.
Thank you very much.